It's a pleasure to be part of Media Rumble. Of course, every year I look forward to the physical Media Rumble because it's a great place to catch up with friends and old colleagues and other people in the industry that you normally read or listen to, but don't get to meet in person. So it's that one time when all the journalists get together to meet in person. But I guess this year we're just going to have to do we're going to have to make do with what we have. But I was pretty thrilled about being assigned this particular panel because of the really awesome women on this panel. Sandhya Ravishankar has been a close friend and a colleague for 2 decades, Sandhya, and she's a journalist I personally really look up to. She's amazing. Patricia Mukhim is an icon in journalism for both men and women. And of course, my pleasure to interact with Nishtha and Meera for the first time. To our audience who've tuned in from across the world on the Media Rumble, you can ask questions. So there is, an option to put in your questions, and we'll take your questions, towards the end of this conversation as well. So let's take a look at what's happening with representation of women in media. Now, unfortunately, I also noticed we don't even write about this or cover it enough. The last report was last year's Media Rumble when Newsrooms put out their representation study. And that's the last one we have to refer to. We understand Newslaundry is working on next year's report will be in by the end of the year. But 20% of the articles written in English on Indian media by women. In Hindi, that's even less. It's at 11%. 15% of the panelists on TV debates on an average are women. And of course, the numbers are similarly in the 15-20% range for, editors, assistant editors, all of those positions. But here we have a couple of women who have bucked that trend. So it's really cool. If I would, if I'd start with Nishtha, Satyam, who represents UN Women, there's been a lot that's been said, Nishtha, about the impact of COVID and the unemployment that will follow impacting women specifically. Do we expect that to also have a play in the media, maybe just in India and across the world? And we've seen a large number of jobs being lost. Is it likely to affect women more?
Thanks, Faye. Thanks for that question. I think some of that data on that question is already out. UN Women has just released a report saying women are twice as likely to be impacted as men when it comes to economic loss or economic uncertainty. And if we were to take any other pandemic as an example, if you were to do an analysis of Ebola, UN Women had put out statistics that was clear in the post-facto scene that women actually took twice as longer to come back to the same jobs. And in more than 50% of the cases did not come back to exactly the same job or the same pay or the same designation. So anytime there is, every single time there is a disaster or there is economic uncertainty for any reason, even in a recession, women disproportionately are impacted. Again, the media as an industry is a derivative of the economy. We have the same issues like gender pay gaps, representation, voice, screen time, prime time. And so we're expected to mimic the rest of the economy. So I think it wouldn't be an underestimation to say that the same data will follow for women in media. Particularly, I think, with the entire stereotyping of the kind of beats that are assigned to women. If you're talking about fashion and beauty and travel and leisure and lifestyle, you immediately think of women. But when you really talk about pandemics, a healthcare crisis, in this case, a healthcare crisis, or the economy, somehow men are just better positioned to do this in the eyes of those who commission these things. And so in the post-facto world of COVID, where we are going to be, hopefully, where we are going to be focusing on things that matter and issues that matter to the lives of people, we probably will not even be thinking women automatically. We will be thinking about bringing more men's voices. And I think that's how economies work. And that's what we're trying to disrupt. And that's the reason that we had commissioned really with Newslaundry the first report, because like they say, no such data existed. And honestly, I think the beginning point of analyzing whether the pandemic is going to impact the media industry disproportionately when it comes to women and gender will start from knowing whether it was in any way better or worse for women in the beginning. So pre and post analysis, I think, is already underway. We're working very closely with Newslaundry. But if you would just were to ask for my opinion, we've already seen women falling into life cycle poverty, a lot of them coming out of schools, and that is not just the reality for it's a reality that pervades class and caste. Of course, stands disproportionate for people from different parts of the society, but when it comes to media, I do think that women will be impacted like they are in any other situation.
Also, there is, you did rightfully mention that it's the softer, the fluff topics that women are asked to write on. And in bad times, those of us who run newsrooms know that these are the jobs that get cut first. The feature writing, the softer, the travel, who's traveling now anyway, who's eating at restaurants. So it's all of those feature writing jobs that will get cut first. So it's likely also that, if we put both of those pieces of information together, that women are likely to lose a lot of jobs. Sandhya, not only have you worked in some of the biggest newsrooms in the country, you're also familiar with regional media and Tamil media. Are things worse, better, than what we see, in Mumbai and Delhi?
I think most certainly things are worse off in the Tamil media, and I'm going to extend this to other regional language media as well. I've worked in a couple of Tamil television channels, and the gender ratio is most certainly skewed towards the male side, and it's not the case in Mumbai or a Delhi, because we had this conversation some time ago, Faye, and the point that you had made is very valid. The fact that many women, young women who are working in the media in Mumbai and Delhi are likely to have, moved out of their parents' houses. They're living alone or living with roommates. They're there only to work. And that makes a big difference, because most of the women working in the regional media space are likely either living in their parents' homes or they're living with their husbands and their families. And there is a lot of pressure on them to ensure that they do not get too involved in work, and they're constantly told, and it's reinforced, that they should not stay out late. So most of the women that I have worked with in the Tamil media have come and told me that they prefer the morning shift, or a general shift. They don't want the night shift, even though there's a pickup and a drop facility for them. They don't want the night shift. They'd rather do a desk job rather than go out reporting. Of course, there are some youngsters who are very passionate about reporting, and that's great to see. But by and large, as women in the regional media space get a little older and perhaps get married, perhaps have children, that ability, that freedom that they have to go out and do what they really love, that reduces, that gets constricted to a very large extent.
And Sandhya, we also had this conversation about job loss post-COVID. Are you getting more, ECVs from young women now who have lost their jobs?
Well, actually most of the CVs I'm getting are from young women. The young men somehow seem to probably find spaces to move into. But you're right. The job loss has thrown mostly young women into sort of just oblivion in a sense, because they are easier possibly for management to get rid of, because they don't create. They're seen as not creating a ruckus, and like you said, they're also doing desk jobs. They're doing lifestyle. They're doing the as you say, as people call it, the fluff kind of work. They're not doing the political reporting. They're not doing the crime reporting. These are beats which are never, nobody ever gets tired of them. They're the important beats. But the women are not doing this work. And that's perhaps the reason that it's easier to get rid of women when it comes to culling.
That actually brings me to Patricia, Mukhim. Patricia, I've seen a lot of breakaway independent organizations being run by Sandhya, for example, runs Lede, where she's the editor, which she started on her own. And a lot of bright and promising journalists have actually broken away and started independent work of their own. But just to let the audience understand what happens when women are sort of pushed into the background of organizations and they don't get to weigh in on the editorial policy, they don't get to weigh in on the stories of the day. Do you believe that brings in a change in the manner in which stories are looked at, in the manner of reporting, in the tone of reporting?
Yeah, to have, fortunately in the Northeast, we have two women editors, myself and Mona Lisa Chankija, who's a very, very strong woman. So we weigh in very heavily. And in fact, I have a constant battle with the management. I'm telling them, because the management thinks that only politics makes news. And I'm telling them, no, it's not that. People want a range of news. And I think day before yesterday, I did a little survey of my own on Facebook, just asking people what is it that they're looking for in a newspaper. Because, I think we're giving too much stress on politics and politicians, and we are forgetting that there are a large section out there that is completely voiceless, especially after COVID. There's so many who've returned, who this region does not have the potential for employing young people. A lot of them are trained in good media colleges and media universities, and then what they have to do is they have to just walk out of the states and go to Calcutta, Bombay, Delhi, and all the metros, find a job there. But post-COVID, many have come back, and I just saw today in our office email that we've had several applications, and mainly from young ladies. They must have been working, maybe temporarily or whatever in some media channels or newspapers, but then they've come back and now they're looking for work. There's a lot of rumble actually, and I really don't see how we can resolve anything. In fact, the other day we had a staff meeting. In our organization, we have a very healthy balance. There are we are a small newspaper, so 4 male sub-editors and 4 female sub-editors. And you could see in the course of the meeting that it was the women journalists who were kind of feeling very insecure about whether they can hold on to their jobs. And we come from this society where divorce is very high, and single parenting is more like the in thing. So there are many women who are running households with children. Now, consider their plight. If they lose their jobs, what do they do next? I don't know what sort of mental health issues this will create, but I can foresee that it's going to be very, very devastating, on women journalists. And also that there are too few women reporters in this region. For some reason, all of them who apply for the desk job. And I guess it's because many of them are not mobile. They have no vehicles. They can't ride a scooty. Whereas male journalists, somehow or the other get a loan, buy a motorbike, and they can go around anywhere. They can cover news. So they get more opportunities.
Yeah. And, Patricia, also, let's be honest about the fact that a lot of the numbers that we saw in Newslaundry's list last year, the victories are Mumbai, Delhi based. Not only is the Northeast also considered, some parts of the Northeast are conflict zones, which makes it even more difficult. We don't have, like Sandhya was saying, the luxury of public transport available at all times of the night. Family members might not be as warm to the idea of you, as a young woman being a journalist.
Yeah.
So is there perhaps a lack of understanding of what happens in other parts of the country because we're so blinkered to Mumbai and Delhi?
Of course, we are completely shadowed. We are in the shadow region of the country. Very few people even try to understand what we go through, because covering conflict is very traumatic. I know it for a fact, because when the militants send us their releases, they expect us to report verbatim. Then we have a high court telling us you're not supposed to report anything from outlawed organizations. Then we ask, so recently we published something saying that this organization has threatened all Hindu Bengalis to leave a certain place or else they will be killed. Now, what do you do when you get that kind of a release? You need to bring that out, because you think you're warning people to be careful about how they live their lives. But then the court says, no. And the police came and said, give us an explanation why you carried this. We are really torn between too many conflicts. The conflict of joblessness, the conflict of migrants returning home and not finding anything to do, and all these other conflicts, the insurgencies, the extortions, it's a cocktail of, and then when you switch on the television and you watch what's happening there, then you're wondering, what is this all about? Why are we focusing on Bollywood to such an extent? I mean, it's almost as if we live in a completely different country or many countries.
Well, if it's very constant, I live in Mumbai, where Bollywood is, and even I feel completely locked out of whatever is happening in the media right now. But let me take that question to Meera, Selva. Meera, thank you for joining us. You run the fellowship program, the Reuters Institute fellowship program to study journalism at Oxford. Again, among the applicants that you meet, that you see, and I'm sure you're meeting a great deal of young women from across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Are you seeing a change? Is there an improvement? Obviously, women are ambitious. We want to rise to the very top. We want to be able to run newsrooms. We want to be able to do better than the men out there. But what do you think the missing pieces are for us to get there?
Okay, so I run a mid-career fellowship, so we get people who are relatively experienced and not at the very beginning, and I run the selection process. So I don't know whether it's my inherent bias or the applications, but we often end up with a kind of very female-dominated fellowship group. And I think this term, for one reason or another, it'll be an all-female fellowship group, by accident, not design. So we get a lot of women, and I think partly that they are looking for opportunities because they're often coming from sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, where their paths to career progression in their own newsrooms and in their own countries can be a bit limited. So sometimes by leaving and applying elsewhere outside their family structures, outside their communities is where they see opportunity. I think they're always excellent participants, and they also come with quite horrific stories, especially from India, of the abuse they're working under online, not just, when they go out on the road, but when they sit at their computer at these desk jobs, they're still targets of abuse and violence. So they really kind of carry a lot of pressure with them. I've done separate research on leadership because I think ultimately the conversation about gender and diversity is about power, because in order for women to truly gain a seat at the table, someone has to give up their seat. So someone has to give up. So what we looked at was who is the editor-in-chief in 10 different countries, not India, because it wasn't one of the countries we covered, but a lot of other countries, Japan, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, as well as the UK, US. And what we found across the board is only 23% of the top editors in the biggest brands in these countries are women, but 40% are journalists. So it's not about saying there aren't enough journalists who are women to fill these roles. They're just not being given the roles. And our fellowship program tries to address this a little bit, to give the women confidence, to talk about career structures, but also it's a conversation that really needs to include men, because you have to make way, you have to give women that you're working with and for space, and you need to understand what the dialogue is, because part of the issues that you talk about work-life balance, it's very true in traditional societies, but even in less traditional societies, it's something that affects men as well. A 24-hour news cycle and constant pressures of deadline makes it very hard to be a good father, to have hobbies, to go home and rest, look after your mental health. So ultimately, a conversation that makes it better for women in the workplace is going to make it better for everybody. But that's a very deep-rooted bias that we need to address.
I want to now place this question before everyone, because we really are, standing at perhaps a crossroad from which our world is going to change. A post-COVID world is going to be completely different from what we've known so far. So none of our learnings up till now may apply, to what's going to happen after this. And my question is simply going to be this. I remember there was this ad that was released back in the 50s about feminism and, women stepping out of the home and, if they wear the pants, what are the rest of us going to do? This idea that there were only a limited number of pants to be worn, and, and the women to not put them on. So is there going to be an idea going forward that there will be only a limited number of jobs the seats at the table, the seats in the studio, the slots on television cycles, the editors' positions, the columnist positions, that they will actually shrink because we're looking at a shrinking industry that's struggling to make money. And as a result, women are likely to get locked out even more. And so, and we've established that through this conversation. So my question is, what do we do? Those of us who have the ability to even be part of a conversation like this, what do we do to unlock those doors? How do we make that difference? Nishtha, I'll start with you. How can we make that difference?
Faye. So I think it's a worthwhile assumption to make, because the size of the table, irrespective of what industry we're talking about, is shrinking. And we all know what happens when the size of the table shrinks. We also know that if you're not on the table, you're probably on the menu. So there are a couple of things that we've known about how the world works, and it's not really an assumption. So are we going to have fewer seats at the table? Absolutely. And if you're not at the table, I've said it, we managed to establish what happens. What can we do? Honestly, I think the dialogue, the easier part of the dialogue is to put the onus back on women and say, well, women need to aspire more, women need to have greater confidence, women need to do X, Y, Z. Yes, that is probably a part of the conversation that we need to have. But what we really need to build is public accountability. For us as human women, that kind of public accountability starts by putting data out there, is by letting newsrooms know that they're being monitored, they're being watched, they're being talked about, and to not make them look good. I mean, honestly, in very undiplomatic ways, that's what you do when you want a conversation started. Like, for example, just to give you some data that we've managed to generate with Newslaundry, the gender representation on gender issues is less than 40%. Let me give you it's a very unpopular thing to say. I have been the head of a UN agency for women for 4 years. I have never ever been contacted by a news agency for a gender panel. Never. I mean, it's a very, very unpopular thing to say, but that's the absolute truth. Because who wants to hear these things? How does it matter in the scheme of things? And whose issues are we talking about? Are we talking about people who mattered to the larger scheme of things, particularly on things that matter? If newsrooms begin to think that politics is the only thing that matter, honestly, that weeds out automatically a lot of the women, because they're not reporting on that beat. And even if they're reporting, they're not prime time, they're not given the same voice. Let me give you another data point. Women have the same struggle in establishing themselves as opinion columnists, as war reporting. So it's all on the same foot. So again, it's important that we put that data out, because that's the beginning of a conversation. And that's how we build mutual accountability. So I think we're taking the first step as UN Women with Newslaundry. I think it's about each one of you, men and women, joining in that conversation. The dialogue is probably the beginning to a lot of change that we want to see. And I think we're trying to have that discourse and at least make these things that we talk about in the mainstream. So this is a beginning. Hopefully we will chime in, and hopefully we will make the right noise. And eventually, like in any other industry, the idea is to build in that peer-to-peer networking, that peer-to-peer pressure to do the right thing until newsrooms themselves are convinced that this is the right thing. And we have enough women in leadership. Like Meera said, you don't know if it's a bias, but it is an all-women's program, because I think women do bring that perspective. I think even if you look at COVID and how women leaders have handled it across the world, those women who have tabled it in the parliament, such as, for example, the UK, they have automatically been able to think of COVID, its relation to domestic violence, its relation to trafficking, its relation to other human rights violations, and the men that who have tabled have not been able to. So it's also the diversity and the bandwidth in thinking that we are bringing. So I think we will have to fight the fight until we have enough women who can push the agenda around and make sure that it cascades.
I can share from personal experience, just like Meera Selva said, that when you have a woman decision maker, you invariably, without, not by design, see more women being included in decisions. You see more women being hired, more women being empowered. When I was, staffing the news channel that I was editor of, we invariably, again, not by design, wound up hiring an entirely female on-air staff. So all our reporters and all our anchors were women, until I got hauled up by management and said, hey, you're going to need to hire at least one man. And so we went and hired one diversity hire of one man and put him on air, because otherwise it seemed like we were doing this on purpose, but we were not. And it just, you need to have a woman at the table to just be able to see things differently. It's not possible to do with a room full of men. But Sandhya, here's the thing. And I like the idea of public accountability and making people look bad because they don't have enough representation. But in your experience, do the chaps running the newsrooms care about looking bad?
Frankly, my dear, I don't think they give a damn. It's a very different world when we're speaking about newsrooms which are non-English, non-national in that sense, and non-Mumbai, non-Delhi based. It's a whole different world, and I'm sure Patricia would probably vouch for that as well, because she comes from a similar kind of part of the country. I don't know. I honestly have no answers to your question, Faye, because I simply have no idea what we can possibly do to make women, help women get jobs when the table itself, when the size of the table itself has shrunk. So I personally only think that this is going to get tougher for women. It already has, and it's probably going to get even tougher for women to get jobs and in the media. And I think women are just going to have to fight that much harder, and that's their lot. Unfortunately, it's very sad, but the brutal reality is that it is their lot. And I from my perspective, what I feel would work is if we can support our peers, other women journalists who want to come into the industry, who want to get in, put in a word for them wherever we can, and give them that kind of moral support to help them fight their own battle, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to have to fight against their parents and, their families, and come out and get working, start working again. So it's their battle to fight, and all we can do is provide support.
So we've got some questions coming in, and I'll sort of blend the questions into the conversation as well. The first one says, and I don't have the name of the person asking it, unfortunately, but it says, what will it take for organizations to take young women freshers straight out of university seriously? Is there a bias in HR about hiring from particular media schools? I'm someone who, despite doing great in terms of internships and academics, I haven't got a full-time job yet. I don't know if that is specific to women, because given the job scene right now, I don't think anyone straight out of college is getting a full-time, full-paid job. Patricia, what's your view on this?
See, most of those who work for us have not come from any media school. We just look at a person's ability to write, for instance, and then the news sense is what is lacking most of the times, the inability to find the news, and the need to handhold. I don't know, when people have worked for 6-7 years, they need to have an independent mind. They need to go and find the stories, but then you have to do the hand holding all the time. And I wanted to say this, post-COVID, Faye, you're talking about the post-COVID world. I think it's going to be a very cruel world where we will have to work really much, much harder than what we are doing now, because as editor myself, I'm also filing stories today because we are not getting the kind of stories that we want, the kind of stories perhaps that, I don't know whether you call it titillate or whatever, but the stories that you think people will read, everything is so cliched, everything is so press released, and you want more than that, but you don't seem to be able to push reporters to do more than what they are doing at the moment. So as editor, you're told that you also have to do some interviews, you have to do this, you have to do that. I mean, it's going to be a very tough world, and anyone getting into the media business now, young professionals will have to arm themselves with that much more strength.
And if you let me go ahead. Did something? Okay, let me just take the next question. Do you think coverage by news media, also at times, if often, it's tilted against women? And of the three, which is the highest glass ceiling and the lowest glass ceiling, print, TV, broadcast, or digital? These are all interesting, very interesting questions. Meera, if I were to come to you on this, and I just want to, round it off on the question that I began with, which is, what can women like us do to hold the door open for other women? And I think that you've already illustrated what you are doing, but I want to understand what your point of view is the rest of us can do to help women stay in newsrooms and to bring more in.
Well, I think putting almost aside the issue of equality and fairness, let's look at it from a business angle. You've said quite rightly that the media is in crisis all around the world. And this crisis is financial. They're losing readers and viewers, and they're losing trust, and they're losing credibility. And so it's a model that's breaking on so many different levels, on a kind of fundamental level as well as financial model. So why would you keep doing the same thing? So why would you stick with a model that excludes 50% of the world's population, requires traits that are not considered female, that produces the news in a certain way, covers politics in a certain way, posters conflict about big personalities? Why would you keep doing this when it's not working? It's not working, obviously. When we look at, and when you start also looking at the world of work in a wider sense, the skills that are needed in a developed economy are not manual skills. They're the softer skills, they're social interactions, their empathy, their networking, their understanding how human beings work. These are all considered female skills. So you have a marketplace where women are actually better skilled for the jobs we're going to need of the future. So if you just look at this, if I was a chief executive of a media company losing readers, the first thing I would think is, where do I get new readers? Where do I get new viewers? How about women? How about 50% of the audience that we're not really targeting? Who are the best people to target these women? Possibly other women. This isn't rocket science. Where do I find the women? Oh, look, here they are. They're all around me. They haven't been hiding under a bush or in the kitchen. They're actually right here banging on the door saying, let me in. All I need to do is open the door and let them in. So I think part of it is fundamentally saying this is a massive missed opportunity as a business leader to say there's 50% of the world's population out there that we're not really reaching in the way we should. And the easiest way to reach them is to recruit them as well as speak to them.
Well, I'll tell you from personal experience. I was told, as the lead primetime anchor and the editor of a channel, that nobody wants to hear, and I'm quoting here, nobody wants to hear news from a girl, not women. And I was heading that newsroom. People find women's voices annoying. Point number 2. Point number 3, why don't you hire a man to sit with you to add credibility? So here, I was told in the team that I was running that I was not good enough and I needed to add a man in a suit to sit next to me to add credibility. And I think that, I've seen through experience, a lot of times when people feel things are not going their way, they hang on to the misconceptions even harder than try something new, because that seems really, really scary. Nishtha, I'll take the next question to you. The question was, do you think coverage in news media right now is oftentimes tilted against women, like the SSR reporting right now? We've seen what a mess it has been. It's brought out, I think, from society and from our media, the most misogynistic nonsense from quarters we expected from, and then some people we didn't expect it from. And would that be different if there were women taking the calls? Actually, honestly, there are some women also part of this whole thing.
Well, honestly, the case in discussion is a very, very good example of what the media can do to women. How you can gain TRPs by exploiting what is sensational, about kind of reiterating popular misconceptions, about talking about what gains the attention. Everybody likes this. The tragedy of all of this is everybody likes a story that befalls a woman, right? Everybody likes a story that trails a woman. And that is, I think, a larger show of what we are as a society. Honestly, it's not just about newsrooms. but in many cases, absolutely, I think reporting, because reporting coverage is tilted against women purely because it makes it more interesting. Now, honestly, as UN Women, we've been trying to change that image of when a rape or violence is reported against a woman, you still see print media carry that image of that girl with her hands in front of her face, tucked in into a corner. And we've been trying to get that image off print. And will you believe that we haven't been able to do that in years? Because it does. I mean, we have to agree to the dark side of our society. It does make somebody feel very comfortable when you see that image, when you don't see that image of a fierce woman breaking barriers, because that's an uncomfortable side to the truth. So of course, I think media is tilted. There was an earlier question about how newsrooms are different. I think in terms of digital newsrooms, today are much better in terms of representation. About 50% of them, about 50% of digital newsrooms have representation as women. And the more you go into print and of course primetime TV, it gets worse. But I think one thing for us to reflect is also how that data has changed over the years. When journalism was, when TV journalism was just news reading and not reporting, you saw a lot of women on TV.
Yeah.
Prime time, because all that they were expected to do at that point of time, and again, this is an admission from an earlier news reporter, was to read the news, not particularly have an opinion, not particularly report. So it was very comfortable to have dressed up women. At that time, we had no apprehensions about it. We didn't need a man aside for credibility, because everything happened as it did, and there was no value add in that reporting.
Because everybody assumed a man had written the script anyway.
Script, right? So as long as it's being said by it's being reported, or rather read out. To actually to quote the right words, it was read out by a woman who was pleasant to look at. It was all fine. But now, when newsrooms, when you're making the news, when news is based on opinion, when news is based on sides, it somehow has become very uncomfortable to see a woman on TV leading a debate or leading the news, particularly if it's not co-shared with a male that, like you said, brings credibility. God knows how they justify that, but still.
Sandhya, the next question is so perfect for you and Patricia, because you guys have so much experience. The question is fundamentally, where is the glass ceiling the lowest? Is it in print, television, broadcast, or digital? Sandhya first.
Digital, but only if you start your own publication.
Yes, if you start your own outfit, you can decide the ceiling or whether or not you want to be open to the sky. Yes, but if you compare print and broadcast,
print and broadcast, it's women have more scope to be eye candy in broadcast, but but that's all you're going to be really. But I must also say that a couple of women, like say an Anjana Omkashyap or a Navika Kumar, they have made their mark in broadcast, and we can't really take that credit away from them. They're doing very well for themselves. We may agree with their politics or not, but they're doing very well for themselves. And they're calling the shots. So but I think glass ceiling is everywhere, really.
Yeah. Patricia?
Yeah, I agree with Sandhya that the glass ceiling, it depends where you're located, no? It's so much location specific. In our part of the world where we do not have too much of broadcast media, it's the print media basically where you have to break the glass ceiling to get in. And we don't have too many digital outlets. It's basically print. And the other states, Assam, for instance, that has has a large number of broadcast channels. They're all male dominated. The anchors, the news readers, of course, are female. And I think, again, we are repeating, it's the face value that they're looking at, not much at what the news anchor brings to the table, because I think, as you said earlier, everything has been written down. So, in this part of the world, you don't find that kind of a disparity And I think it's possible it's much easier actually for women here to break the glass ceiling anywhere if they work hard enough. And I'm sorry to disagree with Sandhya about Navika Kumar. I don't think that is a good model of of being the face of women, because you're just copycatting another channel. You're just competing for TRPs on very, very wrong kind of subjects and issues. And so I don't think I would agree with that. You don't compete by getting one shade worse than the other.
I think that that brings us to a really, really important point, because women who are leading newsrooms in whatever capacity, women who are team leaders, women who are on air, who are writing, also form role models for younger women, and that's a responsibility one can't really shirk, because there are young women still in journalism school watching your every move. There are women in your newsroom watching your every move and learning from you. So there's perhaps a larger responsibility there than there is maybe on the men. And so that brings me then to my last question to this panel, which is, what is your advice then for women in media? Is it, like Sandhya said, start your own outfit? And I've done it myself. Sandhya's done it, because that's really the only way, quite frankly, as a journalist, I found, even with a small outfit of 4 people, we get to decide what stories we want to do. Nobody's telling us, hey, you can't talk about this, it's affecting our business. Nobody's saying things like, don't touch this story, this is not within your scope of work, you're upsetting people, I got phone calls from such and such ministry. None of that happens. You get to decide all of your ceilings, editorially and through diversity as well. Is that the only route, or are there different things that we should be doing as women in media in order to create more opportunities? Meera, if you want to take that first, what is your advice for women who are watching?
Just very quickly, can I just answer the question about the glass ceiling? Because we looked at data on leadership on online and offline brands. So offline means broadcast, print, magazines, and online. And we found no difference. This is not India, but this is other countries we looked at. No difference in the numbers at the top. 5 years ago, when there was similar research being done by others, there was a big difference. There were far more women heads of digital operations and far more men at the heads of legacy operations. Now, this could be partly because digital is increasing in prestige and importance, so the men are moving in there, but it could also be, and certainly in the UK, you've seen this, we are getting women as editors-in-chief of the traditional publications, the Financial Times, for example, just off the top of my head, and the Guardian. So there's not so much of a glass ceiling now, so much of a difference in the glass ceiling. There is a glass ceiling, but it's at the same level in a way in both. Advice, there's how to be a good journalist, which is prove your case, get the stories and show that the stories you're getting because of your position as a woman in the society. Build your brand where you can on social media so that people are following you as an individual. So it's not so easy to take, to replace you, you matter. And then there's the structural issues, which is about maternity leave and sexual discrimination and how sexual harassment is dealt with in the workplace. And this is, again, a conversation that needs to happen at the highest level, at politics and at kind of CEO level, but also one that has to happen within society in every country to say these kind of barriers are also unacceptable. And as a female journalist, one of the best things you can do for yourself and for other people is to write about these issues, to report on these and explain why it matters again.
Same question to Nishtha. What is your advice to women who are watching, women who are working within the sector?
Faye, honestly, just a couple of days back, I just stepped out and I met a feminist who I am completely in awe of and continue to be. And she said 2 things to me. She said, you can't be a feminist if you're still a bureaucrat and you still remain married. Because both are essentially, she said, because both are patriarchal structures. But the real negotiation, and it kind of got me thinking about both. But the real negotiation also is when you're within the system to start an outfit and to essentially be a decision maker is another way of catapulting into decision making. But the real change needs to be systemic. It needs to be top down. It needs to be horizontal. I think the horizontal we spoke about. The vertical is important, and I think I'm going to stick to my point of making people look bad. I absolutely am in no dilemma about how much they care about this, but it is also important on who's making you look bad and where are you looking bad. And I think those are the strategic decisions that we take about where we put that data out to make that difference. Again, peer-to-peer accountability, peer-to-peer pressure is one of the tools. Women have to continue to fight harder for reporting on things that matter, for reporting on things that are not perceived to be soft, and to win those battles. I think, again, I may disagree with people's politics completely, but I kind of side with Sandhya. Ultimately, I think we take great onus on being the role model, the nice person, the person who's doing the right things, which is absolutely important. But I've never heard a man with all these burdens because they're so busy in trying to make business, in trying to do what. And I'm not here in any way propagating that we do things that are outrightly counter to the ethics of journalism. I'm not propagating that at all, but I'm just saying that we have to stay true to the battle. We have to keep the battle cry. I also think it's important that we consolidate, because nobody is going to be able to fight this battle alone. It's going to take a sea of voices to make this an issue in the first place. And you look at any issue that has been tabled in India. Anti-corruption was not an issue for years together until few people got together and said, you know what, this is the biggest mass issue we've ever had. And so if we are all going to congregate and make that noise and continue to make that noise despite our fatigue, some within the system, some outside the system, some from far away, but continue to make that noise together, I think it will eventually change things, or at least it will compel people to look nice. We will also hear men wanting to be the role models and wanting to take all the burden of being nice and progressive and all of that. So maybe we shift the burden a little and transfer that burden a little. Maybe that's going to be a quick success.
Yeah.
That's actually brilliant, because while maybe the men who run newsrooms might not care, but the women who work in those newsrooms can highlight that data. Audiences who are reading newspapers or watching those television channels can turn around and say, hey, if you guys don't correct, the problems with gender representation in your newsrooms, then, we're going to stop watching. We're going to stop buying your newspaper. So there are various ways in which pressure can be exercised. And that actually makes a lot of sense. Sandhya, what's your advice to young women? I know a lot of young women ask you regularly. Go ahead.
I think Nishtha has a point that she really wants to make.
I really want to make that point. Thanks, Sandhya. I think you saw that compulsion through. A very good example here is the ranking and the pressure that the Great Place to Work did for India. It was not an aspiration for Indian companies. They didn't want to be the Great Place to Work. They just wanted to be a place of work. Right? But today you see companies aspiring for that position because that ranking matters to them, because it matters to investors, it matters to audiences, it matters to employees. So essentially, we're just talking about creating that kind of peer compulsion. So.
Yeah, fair point. Sandhya?
I basically have only 3 points to make. The first one, to all women journalists and aspiring women journalists, be very, very tough, because if you're not tough, you're not going to survive. And stick together, especially to women in the industry today. Stick together, stick with each other. And I'm just repeating what Nishtha said. And my third point is basically, don't be afraid, be unafraid, question your bosses, question, your colleagues. I have to tell you a small example, which I found really, I still find it very disgusting. In a few Tamil television channels that I've worked in, and this is not restricted to those channels, it's across Tamil society. When they refer to a woman, how we say she, right? In Tamil, instead of there is a term for she or her, but they don't use it, right? They say it or it's. So the woman is sort of becomes like an object, and I hated it. And I used to tell all my colleagues, like, can you not say her? Why is it so difficult to say her? You say him, but you don't say her. You say it. So it's a really, I don't know, it's a cultural thing. It's a really disgusting kind of mindset. And I don't know, it's over a period of time, because I kept saying it so often, some people started, watching their language around me, but that's about it. But anyway, I mean, I think it's important that we keep questioning all of this stuff. And I think it's even more important that as women we question it rather than, waiting for the men to do it.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it is that Satya is really right about the fact that you need to ask questions and you need to raise something if it makes you uncomfortable. Yes, there will be people who turn around and say, "Aa gayi Jhansi ki Rani, phir se shuru ho gayi feminism," and you'll get labeled the angry feminist, and men will say, "Dude, we're just kidding, yeah." I remember once, in a management conference, a colleague called me sweetheart. And I said, listen,
why was I not there?
And he said, no, but I don't mean it like that. Why you take? So I said, why don't you go around this room and call every man in this room sweetheart? And then you can call me sweetheart, because I happen to be the only woman there. And he was like, hey, sweetie, what do you want to do for lunch? I was like, no, dude. But sometimes it takes being the bad guy. Sometimes it takes sort of calling out this nonsense, even if you think people are not going to like you. Because people are not going to like you anyway, so it's okay. And one last question, and this is an interesting one. It says, it's been 2 years since the Me Too campaign. How much has changed and how much remains the same? Anyone who wants to take this?
Hey, can I come in? Can I come in? But
yes.
Not on the Me Too.
Okay, yes.
You had asked what sort of advice you would give to young journalists, aspiring journalists. I'd like to say that if they come in, let them volunteer to do challenging stories, and prove their merit, because there's nothing to stop them from going out of the way to get those stories and prove to themselves that they can do better, if not, if not really, really well, much better than their male colleagues. And build a brand for themselves. Like you have built a brand for yourself, and therefore now you're able to reach out there. People already know you, they know your face. So what Meera had said about building your own brand, I think is very important. And fight to break the gender pay gap. There is still a gender pay gap, which is it's not good in a country that calls itself a democracy. And there is this diffidence to write about our own problems, to write about ourselves. As it is, journalists hardly write about themselves. So I think it's time we bring this to the table.
Yes. Rajat Malhotra needs to.
Yeah.
Okay. And the Me Too campaign, if anyone wants to deal with it, in my experience, if I may, hazard an answer here, I don't know if things have changed from the perpetrator side, but I do know from experience that young women joining the profession now are far more aware of their rights than we were when we were joining, say, 15 or 17 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. We didn't know what harassment was, and we didn't know when it was happening to us. We just knew that something was wrong, and our friends would say, ye hota hai na, chal, don't go to his office alone. And then everybody would just sort of go out for a drink and sort of make yourself feel better. But young women today, because of the Me Too campaign, know right from wrong. They know what their rights are. They know who to approach. And that actually by itself, that knowledge is, some sort of strength and protection, just that knowledge in that. And that's what I've seen as a difference. But is there anyone else who wants to answer the question about the change that's been brought in by the Me Too campaign?
I'm just going to quickly come in. I think what it has really done is create a space for voice. And that is a great moment in the history of women's rights. It's a great moment in the history of anything, actually, in the history of the world. Because where were you saying all these things earlier, right? It has also created a framework for public accountability on public issues. These are not private issues. And what it has also taught the world to do is to ensure that we do not separate with great convenience someone's body of work and their display of very unpleasant, untoward behavior. Women have never had that choice. You couldn't be living a disastrous life 6 onwards And even if you were the greatest professional on the earth and you were a star at what you did, you couldn't have led that life, right? We were never given that choice. We don't want to have that choice either. So to a large extent, it has also taken that choice away from men, because we have created a system of public accountability. Without anonymity, some of these cases have taken the legal route. We all know that. And it has created a space for solidarity, both with men and women. It's not just a women to women movement. There are a lot of men who have really weighed in the Me Too movement. And I think to mobilize one half of humanity in support of the other, particularly on issues that impact everybody's life and don't allow you to conveniently live a grand life everywhere else, and live a life that's so unworthy of, on the other hand. So it has helped us to reconcile private reality with public reality, which I think is a great win for the Me Too movement.
That's actually very well said, and it brings us then to the end of our conversation, because we've run out of time. Ladies, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and answering all of those questions. I had a brilliant time chatting with you. Takeaways really: public accountability through data, volunteering to do tougher stories, pushing the envelope without being afraid to ask questions. A lot of times, I've personally seen young women in press conferences, in corporate spaces, who know what they want to say, who know the question, and they're thinking, they spend so much time thinking, should I say it? Will I sound stupid? That the moment passes.
Yeah.
And there's always a guy in the room who's not afraid of sounding stupid, who will, jump in and, take that press conference and take that opportunity to ask the question. So don't be afraid, and be comfortable with your own voice, and fight really, and this is really important, fight to close that gender pay gap. And I think that given where we started this conversation about post-COVID job loss, the thing that we must discover is that in families, if women are paid less than men by design, when push comes to shove, and when somebody's job is, when somebody has to pull back for whatever reason, it invariably becomes the woman, because she's being paid less. So we've already lost that battle. So when there's a child born, or an elderly parent needs to be taken care of, or India is in fact the only country in the world where women take sabbaticals because somebody's doing an exam, a 12th standard board exam. Women drop out of work to help their kids study, because otherwise bad results are also the mother's responsibility. When those choices come up, it's invariably the woman's job that is lost, because she's getting paid less anyway. In fact, in many cases, she's getting paid lower than it would cost to hire someone to do that work. And so if we don't close the gender pay gap, we're already losing that battle. And I have seen that there is a difference when there are women making decisions, that gap gets closed immediately. So pushing more women into positions of decision making, starting your own outfits, building your own brands, and not being afraid by the sound of your own voice. I think that's a really important thing. As women, we need to get used to the fact that we have opinions and they're valid, and we can, we have a right to sound those opinions in full rooms of men. So I'm going to leave it there and hand it back to the team at Newslaundry. Thank you so much, ladies. I had a really good time.
Thank you. Thank you.